I have this book in my library entitled Seeing What Others Don't. This book is a recommended read for parents, business executives, teachers, military tacticians, anyone who is in leadership, or anyone who wants to make sense of things and gain helpful insights. So the author Gary Klein lists for us ways one can obtain insight. There are accidental insights. Then there are insights born out of creative desperation. In chapter 6 of this book, he tells the story of Aaron Ralston. Aaron is an American mountain climber who went hiking in the canyons of Utah in May 2003. During that trip, however, he fell into a crevice and his right arm became pinned by a boulder. Ralston was trapped for over 5 days, and he recounted the ordeal in his book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. You can learn more about his story from the movie 127 Hours. So Ralston was trapped for over 5 days. And worse, he never told anybody where he was going that day. He didn't bring a cell phone with him. There was no way to communicate and call for help. So, left to himself and in great pain, he tried to use a small pocket knife to carve away the rock in order to free his right arm. He did not succeed. All he accomplished was dulling the blade. And after a few days, he accidentally cut into the thumb of his trapped arm and confirmed that that trapped part had died from lack of circulation. It was no longer worth saving. It might even be poisoning him. He was out of food, almost out of water, and completely isolated. Ralston fully expected to die. So he thought of giving up trying to free his arm and instead tried to amputate it in order to free himself. But by this time, his knife was too dull. It would never be able to cut through the bones of his forearm. He truly was trapped. At one point, he lost his composure and gave in to an emotional outburst. He tried to yank his arm free of the rock that encased it, thrashing back and forth. And during this tantrum, he felt his right arm bend unnaturally and discovered the hint that he needed to free himself. He didn't have to cut through the bones of his arm. The boulder had pinned his arm so tightly that he could snap the bones. And once he did, he used a smaller blade to cut through the tissue and most painfully, the nerve bundle. He managed to free himself and find help. What did Ralston learn from this predicament? Well, as soon as Ralston shifted his goal from freeing his healthy arm to freeing himself from his dead arm, he discovered that the boulder was no longer his enemy. It was now his friend. The boulder enabled him to escape by providing the solid leverage he needed to break the bone of his arm. And he simply looked at the situation from a different perspective. Instead of the boulder trapping him and killing him, he chose to see the boulder as the way to save himself. Now, isn't that the way we survive through difficult ordeals? Instead of looking at difficulties as our enemies and cry out in frustration and anger, we can choose to look at them as friends. The same adversity that brought about bad can be the same adversity that would bring about good. The Bible tells us in James chapter 1 verses 2 to 4, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Now, nobody likes trials. No one lives for tests. That is why students they jump for joy when exams are canceled. Yet, difficult trials and tests can be seen not as hated enemies, but as enemies turned unexpected friends. Why? Because if you and I believe in the sovereignty of God, if you and I believe that God is good, then we will expect the trials we dislike to serve God's good purposes for us. For God's purpose in sending trials is to test and strengthen our faith that we may develop perseverance. When you and I have this godly insight on life's challenges and difficulties, you and I can be resilient. You and I can bounce back because we see trials not as our enemies, but as our unexpected friends who will draw us near to God, who will draw us to depend on Him and mature us in Christian character. Jesus, God's Son, He didn't like going to the cross. He prayed that it be taken away from Him. Yet in faith, He submitted to God's will. The result? The cross that killed Jesus made us all who believe in Him alive. The cross that Jesus didn't like became the means for Him to redeem us for Himself. Do you and I like trials? We don't. But they don't have to be our enemies. They can be unexpected friends used by God for His good purposes for us. And so, whatever difficulties or trials you may be going through today, look to God for help. And may the sufficient grace He promises in Jesus empower you to persevere, to be resilient, and to lead you to maturity.